Welcome to the Tom Nelson podcast. I have Julie Kelly here. And Julie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself to get us going?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for having me on. I've been a fan of your work for so long. So I'm a senior contributor to American Greatness, amgreatness.com. And I do a lot of interviews, and especially because my main beat right now is January 6th and FBI and DOJ corruption.
You say you're doing interviews, a lot of them today?
I've got a lot today.
Okay.
Anytime there's breaking news about the FBI and or January 6th, which is happening in real time even today, I
Okay.
get a lot of requests. So, but I'm so happy to be on your show today too.
Good. Okay. Can you tell us how you got started in climate skepticism?
Right. So that's how I think you and I first
Mhm.
connected
Mhm.
several years ago. Is I really started, my background is in political consulting. I took about a decade off to be a stay-at-home mom, got back into political consulting in suburban Chicago. And then I started teaching cooking classes out of my home, just sort of a whim, trying to do something different. And at the time, there was a lot of food policy issues. This seems like a whole different America when we were worried about things like school lunches and GMO labeling, but that all seemed really scandalous. So I started writing about that, was picked up at a few outlets like National Review and The Federalist. And my work on covering food issues, especially agricultural biotechnology, then naturally led me into covering climate change. And so that's really my background, how we connected and how I really got into covering what would be considered scientific issues.
Okay, very good. I was just saying before we went online here, I really enjoy looking back for anybody's Twitter feed. I like to search their handle up and see what they're saying about climate. And you have said a lot of really good stuff about climate over the years. So maybe we can talk about some of that. But do you have more to tell before we get into that?
Nope,
What
I'm ready
your
to go.
background?
I'm sure there's a lot to
Okay.
cover.
Okay, let's see. One thing you said is most of the GOP is on board with the climate agenda. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And is that still the case?
I think it absolutely is, especially when you look at the GOP Senate. They are outwardly supportive of these green energy policies. They show no skepticism about the climate change narrative or movement, really. They've really sat on their hands as this Biden regime has completely decimated our energy grid and made these outlandish and really not attainable deadlines, as we see the climate cabal always does. And so they're really doing nothing to halt that. And, you have senators like Mitt Romney who are fully supportive of the idea that man made global warming is a thing. And they want to, at this, as you know, Tom, more than I do, because I've kind of not covered climate change as much the last few years. But this is just a huge money maker for a lot of their donors and a lot of these industries who support the Republican Party. So they in turn are supporting it as well. You see less enthusiasm in the House, but definitely the GOP Senate is on board with the climate change movement.
I know there's a guy in the House named Thomas Massey that seems to be a solid climate skeptic. I like to hear what he's saying about it. Do you see other people that are publicly willing to say that this doesn't make any sense in terms of politicians?
Not so much anymore. I know Representative Massey, obviously, he's a scientist. I think he's an MIT scientist. So he's smart. He knows what he's talking about. So I don't see a lot of necessarily pushback. I just think it's, Tom, because there's so many crises happening everywhere. Obviously, you see Republicans who want to restart our energy production, who don't want to see the elimination of the fossil fuel, not just industry, but the basis of our energy grid, of what keeps us alive and keeps us thriving. And so maybe in a way, some of this is backfiring on the climate cabal and Democrats, because it's very easy for your typical suburban mom to say, yeah, I believe in global warming and climate change, and I want to do this and that. And then all of a sudden they start fulfilling the fantasies of the climate cabal. that they've wanted for over 50 years, then all of a sudden they go, well, whoa, I don't like my gas prices, quadrupling in a matter of a year, 18 months. I don't want to be forced to buy an electric car. I see the benefits of natural gas and oil and coal and nuclear. So, of course, it's not a fossil fuel, but, aside from thinking that we can power the world's greatest economy on solar panels and wind turbines has always been ridiculous, but maybe some of the more naive, I'll put it nicely, people, the voters and citizens in this country are waking up and realizing that's just not realistic.
Do you think of people in the U.S. or voters in the U.S. are keeping track of what's going on in Germany, and if they're going to be freezing in their homes this winter, et cetera, and what's going on in the Netherlands with the seizing of the farms? Do you think that that has a potential to make a big change in our electorate, or they don't know about that yet?
Probably not yet, Tom,
Okay.
but I'm sure as winter progresses and they see it, they will see, because of course, naturally, a lot of things that happen there related to energy or anything scientific, pesticides, farming policies always end up here as well. So I'm sure that crisis will again open some eyes here.
Another tweet I wanted to read here, quoting you. What's happening now is the climate dystopia the left has long craved. Skyrocketing fuel costs, limited meat supply, restrictions to airline travel, trillions in new taxes redistributed to climate justice and clean energy. This is why the Biden regime is not panicked. It's by design. That's very well said. Do you have any additional comments on that part of it, or?
No, gosh, sometimes I just say the smartest thing.
You do.
No,
you really do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was pointing out when the gas prices and food prices started spiking, and I said, you'll notice that AOC and Bernie Sanders aren't complaining about high gas prices. They're not complaining that meat now is too pricey and out of reach of American families. This is part of their agenda, right? They've made this clear. Again, you know this better than anyone. It's part of the Green New Deal. They want meat consumption at zero. They want people not being able to afford to fly or even fill up their gas tank. This is the long, unless it's them, of course, unless AOC is leaving Manhattan to go to vacation in Florida with her boyfriend, then that's different. She's not walking there. So again, Tom, I think the big thing is exposing the hypocrisy of the climate cultists versus the agenda that they promote. But I do think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, my base of knowledge, to the extent it's nothing like yours, but watching these people in action for years, then seeing that translate over into COVID lockdowns and what happened starting in the spring of 2020. I think that's why I was one of a handful of skeptics on the right about these lockdown and social distancing policies from the very beginning, because it was going to get the left and the environmental wackos exactly what they wanted. And in a large part, it did.
Yeah, you were ahead of me there. You said at the time that you could see the parallels between the climate and the COVID stuff, right? You're onto that, right? Specifically, what did you see that allowed you to figure that out so quickly?
I think, first of all, just seeing the same cast of characters who were promoting this early on, the lack of data, which of course is, really pervasive in the climate movement. They say all kinds of things, they tweak data, they don't have data to support it. But I think the biggest thing, Tom, was looking at the two models that were presented at the end of March 2020. So that was the Christopher Murray model out of Imperial College. Now I'm like dusting off my brain of January 6th because it seems like so long ago. And then, of course, the IHME models out of the University of Washington. And so, no, that was Murray. One was Ferguson. I'm sorry, Ferguson Murray. So the two modelers, and they, of course, these institutions and these scientists had a history of being climate propagandists as well. But you saw them quickly come together with these models that made no sense. And their projections were so outlandish and out of whack. I think it was 2 million Americans were going to be dead by August of 2020, but they really had no basis for it. And so I think looking at those sketchy models, the same verbiage, the same tactics. You're a grandma killer. You don't care about children. You don't care about old people. You don't care about the environment. Those same tactics, the same bullying tactics were employed early on. So that's why I think my tweet from March 12th of 2022, going along with the tweet you just read, is that this is what the left wants. They want everyone terrified. They want people locked in their homes. They want sources of joy stripped out of your life. And that's more dangerous than a virus. And so I think that's why I was early. And, you know, Tom, there were probably, I could count on two hands the number of people on the right. I don't want to say influencers, but reporters, journalists, opinion makers who were against the lockdowns from the very beginning, including the 15-day stop the spread. And so I think that over time, and it happened kind of quickly, as those models were quickly debunked and fell apart, and then the pseudoscience of social distancing was exposed, I think that, you know, it even gave me a little more confidence that I was on the right track, because that period, I think I probably lost the most sleep, thinking if I was wrong about this, you know, I would be finished in what I was doing, which, okay, that's a risk that you take. But just things didn't add up. And I think it was just the bad actors involved who are also involved in climate.
Speaking of journalism in general, why aren't journalists doing their job at all with the climate? That they're just swallowing the climate crisis narrative, and the hurricanes are getting worse, blah, blah, blah. Do you see that ever changing, or they're just going to continue to swallow it? It's pretty amazing to me as an outsider that journalists are not doing journalism on climate in particular.
You know, I think back when I started covering climate, so this would be like maybe 2014, 15, 16, there seemed to be a little more vigorous debate about climate, and some pushback, at least on our side, especially some of the whistleblowers coming forward, talking about the tweaked data. You had, you know, people like Roger Pelkey Jr., who took all sorts of heat from, I mean, really the Obama administration trying to ruin his career for his data about global warming and hurricanes. So, but there was at least some debate, some pushback on our side, and people kind of coming to our side. Judith Curry is another one. But now I honestly don't see as much reporting on climate. And I think the New York Times for a while had this ongoing series, you know, The Death of the Planet or something crazy. I think that's kind of gone by the wayside just because there's so many things to cover, and because they did achieve a lot of their objectives during the lockdowns. And so you see how that manifested in how, you know, the consequences in Europe right now. You see the consequences in the United States, which we will see for years. Things that, you know, will air travel, you know, what we had before, will that ever resume to normal levels? No. And that's exactly how the climate people want it.
Are you worried about the threat of a central bank digital currency that says you've flown too much this year, that's it, or you've bought too much gas, too much meat? Is that a real threat? I think it is.
You know, I would have said 2 years ago, no, that's preposterous. That will never happen. But seeing what I see, all of these institutions, private sector, due to, say, the January 6th defendants, canceling their accounts, dropping even their pensions, their 401ks. These are people who have been charged with misdemeanors, not convicted of anything like insurrection. So 2 years ago, I would have said no way, but now, yes, I definitely can see it. And that's really a frightening prospect.
So you've done some good work, I think, comparing the treatment of the January 6th protesters to climate protesters who happily went in and occupied Pelosi's office and nobody cares. What do you think about how can they get away with that? The difference in the treatment of those people?
You know, Tom, I think that's with my coverage with January 6th, the thing that infuriates people the most. It's not just the double standards of justice between political protesters in Washington, whether it was the climate protesters AOC, before she was a congresswoman, going into Nancy Pelosi's office, basically standing on her desk, dragging in all the Sunrise Movement protesters with her. And instead of being arrested and hauled off to a DC gulag where she was denied bail and called a domestic terrorist, Nancy Pelosi sent out a tweet saying, we should welcome these people. I'm happy to have them in my office. I want to find a compromise and negotiate and move forward with their climate agenda. That really infuriates people, but I think even more outrageous to people is the disparate treatment between J6ers and the 2020 rioters. You have the same DOJ calling trespassers domestic terrorists, seeking terrorism enhancements for ridiculous charges like obstruction, but at the same time actively dropping charges against far more violent repeat rioters related to the 2020 George Floyd protests, which resulted, as we know, far more destruction, death, trauma, and real terror in this country, including in Washington, D.C., than anything that could come close to 4 hours on Capitol Hill almost 2 years ago.
Has any other reporter spent more time than you in reporting on the January 6th situation and the protesters, or?
Not on our side. I mean, there
Okay.
are beat reporters in the mainstream press who cover this a lot, but not on our side. I mean, obviously we have people like Darren Beatty at revolver.news who has done tremendous investigative work. He really was the one who ID'd Ray Epps. He's done tremendous work on the pipe bomber. I'm grateful to have people like Tucker Carlson when the rest of Fox News and other cable outlets would not cover questions or what was happening to these detainees. He stepped up really early. So did people like Mark Levin, Dan Bongino. I'm going to leave people out, but they have been very instrumental and crucial in amplifying my work and Darren's work and a couple of other journalists on the right who are uncovering the travesty of this prosecution and, of course, all the unanswered questions that we still don't have answers to about January 6th, which I think the American people are starting to question as well.
Okay, very good. Another quote I want to read from you from Twitter is, you all can keep accepting at face value what we're being told about Russia, Ukraine. This is a rapid escalation toward a longtime climate goal of zero emissions. The pandemic got it rolling, and this crisis is the engine booster. It's going to get much worse. Again, well said. Can you say it? Anything else about that you'd like to add? Or
I mean, I have so much to say about what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. In terms of climate, not so much, but just the fact that we have so many issues here. There was this heartbreaking story in the Washington Post yesterday about a town in North Carolina that's been absolutely decimated, young people who have died over the past 10 years from fentanyl overdoses. And yet here we are fixated on a thug like Zelensky. Obviously, Putin is a thug as well, but we're not sending him, tens of billions of dollars that we don't have and furthermore have no accountability for. So yes, but they're all tied together. But now, Europe looks like they're going to pay the ultimate price, which is why it sounded like EU leaders confronted Joe Biden and his administration during the last meeting and telling him how their heavy-handedness in Ukraine is causing these problems. The priority that America has with Ukraine and their spending and forcing all these green energy policies are really damaging European countries and European citizens. So even this is starting to backfire a little bit on the Biden regime too.
Okay. Do you have any opinion on whether the Chinese government, whether they believe in the climate scam at all?
Well, they do because, right, that's where we get all of our solar panels. So, I mean, they sell a lot of the material that contributes to the infrastructure of green energy. But I doubt it because I think that they still have a lot of coal mines that are open, and I think that they're opening new ones all the time. So I really doubt it. I don't think the Chinese have dedication or devotion to anything except control and power, hegemony, and taking over America as the world superpower. And whatever it takes to get there, that's what they'll do.
I agree. Another quote from you. We've been getting played from the start. This is all performative and essential to the climate cabal's goal of making fossil fuels so expensive and anathema. I don't know how to pronounce that word, that we're left with only green energy options. How do you pronounce that word?
Anathema.
Anathema. Okay.
You could
All
both
right.
be wrong, but I'm sure I
Yeah.
spelled it right because there's spell check on Twitter. I think that.
Okay. But anyway, that is still the case. That's really the goal here, is that they want to make everything else so expensive that we have to try to power our economy on wind and solar panels. That's it.
I think that they
Seems like it is.
do.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
this is where all the subsidies are coming from, you know, battery storage, things that just seem, you know, just it's not realistic that we are going to be able to keep this economy going. We already see the consequences on our economy. I mean, energy is tied to everything, whether it's domestic spending or commercial spending, the health of our overall economy, businesses being able to manage their own expenses and their bottom line. And so this is having fallout everywhere. But a lot of people who are feeling the pinch are also responsible for this, as you know, Tom. Big businesses who are front and center on advancing the climate agenda. And, you know, now they're paying the price for this too.
I don't know if I read this one. Tell me if I read this one before. My column from April of 2020. Quote, nearly everyone on the left and an alarming number of people on the right have now been intimidated into silence and submission by the raised hand of, quote, science. Decades of climate change brainwashing is reaping huge benefits. And I guess we mentioned that before, but that's a great way to put it, that really helps sell the COVID thing, the climate change brainwashing beforehand. It's all tied together, as you say, right? Yeah.
It is. And I think, you know, having all of these confrontations with climate people like Michael Mann and who's the other guy? Is his name Gavin?
Gavin Schmidt. Gavin Schmidt. Yeah.
Exactly. So my confrontations with those people and the name calling that I endured when I started writing about climate really prepared me for, even though it was far worse under COVID, the name calling. You know, I was not intimidated. I was not worried about someone calling me a science denier. You know, I've been called that a million times, even saying, you know, you don't care if grandmas die or what. Okay, I've heard all that before too. But it was the raised hand and people who had not really been in that battle with the climate left, knowing how vicious they are, knowing the power that they had, knowing that they had the support of the media and politicians of both parties. They weren't really prepared. And so I do think that really intimidated a lot of people on the right into just, if they weren't fully going along with the lockdowns, that they were mostly sort of sitting there silent. But I think I wrote in that same column too, of course, doing all of this means never having to say you're sorry. You know, the climate people have never apologized for all the lies that they've told, all their fabricated, doctored data, all the predictions of doom and gloom that they made that never came to fruition. You know, you still have a clown like Michael Mann who's getting awards, who's getting payoffs, you know, he's getting grants, etc. He's a hero, even though he's a total clown. He's been wrong almost, you know, how many more times than he's been right. So that lends itself to an Anthony Fauci, right? Fauci can do and say whatever he wanted. He's totally unapologetic, even though one could argue that Anthony Fauci has caused so much more human damage than someone like Michael Mann has. Michael Mann was basically in it for himself. Anthony Fauci is responsible for untold levels of human misery and long-term devastation. But he never has to apologize. You know, he gave a deposition last week where he said, I don't know, or I don't recall, like 175 times. He's in his 80s. He's not going to go to jail. There's very limited things that even Republicans can do with him now that he's leaving government. So, you know, these people just always get away with it, whether it's these climate scientists, whether it's people like Fauci, Deborah Birx, the modelers who came out with these crazy models early on, or any government official, FBI, DOJ, you name it, they always seem to get away with it no matter how much damage they cause.
So Fauci actually said attacks on me are attacks on science itself, something like that, right? That really sums it up. I think the climate scientists were kind of doing that too, that you can't, I'm science, and if you disagree with me, you hate science, blah, blah, blah. Pretty amazing. But did you have personal interactions with the Gavin Schmidt or Michael Mann email exchanges and stuff? Is that a thing that happened?
Mostly on Twitter.
Okay.
So, which was probably better than doing it in person, although I would have been happy to do it in person.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, a lot of times those guys are bullies online, but if you try to confront them to their faces, they're not so tough. But you know, it was good to have that sort of debate, and it did prepare me for both COVID and then January 6th. And you're right, when someone like Anthony Fauci says, "Oi, I'm the science," you know, or "You're not a scientist, so you can't talk about this," right?
Mhm.
I heard that all the time.
Yes.
You don't have a science degree. How do you know? Well, I know how to read, you know, I know how to process things, and I'm not in academia. I'm not in this echo chamber like the scientific world is. And I think scientific world really hurt itself after the 26 elections. And I had an article in the National Review about that because people who I were aligned with, we were talking about GMOs, we were talking about the advances of agricultural biotechnology, we were talking about how good science can be, not just for farming here in America and food supply, but creating so many opportunities for destitute people, malnourished children, you know, golden rice, where you could enrich staple foods with vitamins that would help kids. We were all sort of on the same side, even though politically we were different, we really didn't talk about it. But after Trump was elected, that night, there was just this huge division between people I had been aligned with on the left, even though it wasn't political, who all of a sudden were calling me a racist. You know, all of a sudden they were calling me an anti-Semite, that I was homophobic, that I supported rapists like Donald Trump. I mean, this was the sort of vitriol, literally in a matter of few hours. People I considered allies were calling me every name in the book because Trump won, and they knew that I supported Donald Trump in the election. And so I really think that that started the trajectory of the scientific community damaging its credibility. And frankly, I don't know if it will ever rebound, and it really shouldn't after what they did during COVID.
Where do you see this going from here as all these kids that are so scared about the climate catastrophe as they grow up and it never happens? So what's going to be the effect of that? They're not going to trust science, right?
Right. Tom, I think that's such a good question, is how will our children, the ones who are impacted, the ones who had their rites of passages abruptly stripped out of their lives forever, who lost friends that they will never see again because they left college campus and never went back. You know, all the losses that our kids have endured, and now starting to look back and realize none of it had to happen, that there was no scientific justification for social distancing or locking down or masks or mandatory vaccines that our kids have been forced to take, that it was just lie upon lie upon lie. And instead of the scientific community correcting itself early on and realizing, okay, this is only going to get worse, they doubled down, they tripled down, you know, it went from bad to worse to worse to worse. So how this will play out with climate, you know, short-term and long-term, are young people growing up realizing what they endured at the hands of extremely dishonest scientific and public health community, applying that to other science that they are told is real, like man-made global warming. I think it's going to be interesting. I think it'll take years to shake out, but I can't believe that this generation will have any institutional trust in the scientific community, in public health, in the media, in academia, because they were misled purposefully for political reasons, really every step of the way.
I mean, do you think there could be any silver lining where people realize that they have to sanity check stuff for themselves instead of just believing whatever's on their TV? Or... Seems like it.
I think that will be a silver lining. I mean, Tom, again, you know this better than I do, covering these institutions and how brazenly dishonest they are, and how they get away with everything. I think if there is a silver lining, it will be that they have destroyed their own reputations, long overdue, but finally destroyed it. And the next time they try something like this, whether it's a climate lockdown, whether it's another viral lockdown, whatever it is, to try to shut down people's lives, I really hope that young people, they did not rebel when this happened in 2020. Next time, when they're a little bit older and wiser, won't take it.
Very good. I have one more tweet, brilliant tweet of yours to read from 2021, June. Tip for kids at home: expertise is no substitute for hard work in reporting. The experts in any field, public health, climate, or law, let their credentials rather than their homework do the talking on what they consider their exclusive purview. Big mistake. I think it's a great tweet. Anything to add to that one?
No, I mean, we saw it during climate all the time, and during COVID, this appeal to authority. Our betters with letters, the more letters you had after your name, somehow that was used as, as sort of a billy club that no one else was supposed to challenge you. And so I do think that hard work, and even scientific people who I would debate early on about social distancing and the 6 feet, et cetera, they didn't even know where it came from. They didn't know where it originated. It originated with a scientist's daughter's junior high paper. And the same scientists who all of a sudden were championing this during the Bush administration had written extensive papers talking about how social distancing never worked. It never should work, never did work. There was no proof. So it was all political. So yeah, but I think hard work overtakes really anything in life, including natural intelligence and natural talent. Sometimes you can outwork those people better than anybody. So
okay.
That's what I would say.
What do you see as the future of journalism now in the next 10 or 20 years? Do you think it's going to be more people working out of their basements on their own, figuring stuff out, ferreting stuff out? Or do you think journalism is going to be the same with professional people that are following the mainstream narrative? What's it going to look like?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I'm really proud of some of the people on our side. When I look at my colleagues like Miranda Devine, or I look at Molly Hemingway, or I look at some of the freelance work being done just, on Substack, or some of the other programs on the right. These are people who are outworking reporters in the mainstream media every minute of every day, and doing the really grunt, detailed, tough work, right? Reading, tracking down sources, running down leads. So that's the sort of thing that will always work in journalism. And if somebody thinks they're going to sit in their house and just look things up on the internet and not get any real world experience, and be a good journalist, I've got news for you. That's not going to work. I mean, it might work in some places like MSNBC, where they don't do any of that work. They just read whatever's in front of them. But if you really want to be successful and make a difference and do the kind of work or uncover the stories that no one else is doing, that's just sort of, basic journalism 101.
Okay. I am hugely encouraged in the climate world. As I look around, I'm constantly finding new people on Twitter that I've never even heard of that are producing brilliant fact checking of all these details. It's wonderful that they're doing that. And if I compare that to what Seth Borenstein is doing, like the #1 guy, his work is just terrible compared to these people working for free. Or all the stuff that Andy Revkin did, his was a little better, but still, these people working for free that I've never heard of are doing a way better job. That encourages me.
Right.
I hope.
Well, and I think too, I will say, Twitter, social media is a good place for that. If you look at Russiagate, you look at the origins of, the Russia collusion hoax, and people really unwinding that, unraveling that. You had anonymous accounts on Twitter who were legit investigative type people who found stuff that even the media types on our side didn't figure out. They really were in the weeds. They were reading the transcripts from congressional investigations. They were going back and looking at interviews. They were looking at all of the documents and evidence that, even people like me, when you're on a beat or you're trying to cover 3 or 4 different issues, didn't. You had anonymous Twitter accounts who did better work in uncovering the corruption of Russiagate than you had certainly anyone at the New York Times or CNN or Washington Post, which isn't saying much, but also even some of the top influencers on the right too. So there's plenty out there, plenty of people. It's just where you look.
Do you have any thoughts on the social media landscape in general? Like right now, I'm all about Twitter. It seems like Twitter is the place to be, as far as I can tell. But are you on Facebook and other places to see what's happening over there? I am not.
No, I've never been on Facebook. I'm not on like Instagram or anything. I really spend a lot of time on Twitter because, as Elon Musk has said, it is America's town square, right? Mm-hmm. This is where you can confront lawmakers, even though it's not, virtually. This is where you can get into it with reporters on the other side who are promoting a narrative that is false. You can actually confront them. And you can challenge them, and you can actually have a good debate with some of them, even if you disagree. And so I think that this is why the left is so up in arms about Elon Musk, because he's bringing some of these people back, because the left is all about silencing free speech. It's about crushing and criminalizing political dissent. And so they don't want these other accounts put back on Twitter. Because they really don't like the challenge. They don't enjoy the debate like they should. Like I think that our side really does. And I think that's something Elon Musk is revitalizing on Twitter, and I'm really grateful for that.
So I just checked your Twitter profile, and you have 340,000 followers. But they never gave you a blue check, though, huh?
They did not.
Okay.
And I'm happy to pay Elon Musk anything, but out of conscience, I am not going to get a blue check mark. I'm going to be the last person on Twitter who does not have a blue check mark. That's my goal, Tom.
I have a paid for one now, but yeah, that's fantastic. But there are people on the left that whatever, I forget. There's a Joe McCarthy that I met that he has hardly any followers, but you got the blue check, I think, because his politics were correct. Yeah, pretty amazing.
That's right.
Can you get even verified blue checks anymore? Is that something that you can apply for and get your free blue check, or that's not a thing, I guess?
I don't think so.
Maybe not.
I think everyone's got to pay the $8. And like I said, I'm happy to pay $8. I pay $80 a month just to support Elon Musk and what he's doing. But since I never had one before, I'm not going to get one now. Like you said, I don't even know how I got that many followers. I didn't buy any. I guarantee you that. But, it just, I guess it doesn't matter to me, I guess, like it did when I first got on Twitter. So
you joined in 2014, it says. So yeah, it's a huge success. So have you had viral tweets that have gotten 1 million or more impressions, or you?
Oh yeah. I've gotten some with 1 million or more impressions. So, and I do think Twitter has been absolutely indispensable in getting the story of January 6th, especially the detainees, the political prisoners, what's happening in this prosecution. It has been instrumental. It's just, there's no other place where you can post these, court filings or what you're hearing in these court hearings and get that out to so many people. There's just no other place you could do it except for Twitter.
Okay. Have you had to self-censor so that you can stay on Twitter? You must have at some point. A lot?
Every day.
Yeah.
No.
Have you been banned?
Delete, type it, delete. I'm more self-censoring. So, not so I don't get in trouble. I will say for a long time, I was in trouble. I was fearful I would get deplatformed because of my coverage of January 6th. It is nice to wake up and not open your Twitter and not be afraid you're going to see accounts suspended, which I did for, months, because what I was covering was so off the beaten path. So it is nice to not have to worry about that anymore for the time being.
But you were suspended for months during this time, or
no, I was worried.
Worried about it. Okay.
People would say to me all the time, you're going to get suspended because of what you're saying about DOJ, the FBI, or whatever. I was like, okay, then I will, but I'm going to keep saying it until it does, and then now I feel like I don't have to worry about it.
I got suspended for a week for saying the wrong truthful thing about a word that begins with an I that I'm not going to say here, but yeah, it's it was an amazing time. I think they've opened up a little bit since then, but okay. So anything else we should be covering? This has been a great talk. I don't want to take up too much of your time because you have so
No, and
many
I'm looking,
interviews.
my battery is about to die.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to plug it in. Oh, I got 16%, so we should be fine.
Okay.
No, Tom, I just want to thank you for all your hard work on climate. I mean, I have learned so much from you and others on Twitter, your brave voices and exposing the left and the climate well. And so I'm just, thank you so much for having me on and for covering my work and reading all of my masterful tweets that I've forgotten about.
There's a lot more that I didn't read, but yeah, you're doing great work. So thank you for taking the time, and we'll talk to you next time.
For sure. Thanks, Tom.
All right, goodbye.